Games are a form of art. In recent years, this has become a more and more popular statement. We pin it to games with unique art styles, the labours of love made by small indie studios, games that can often sacrifice the experience for the visuals. But when a game acts like art, uses a less conventional sense of the word, and aims to disturb and discomfort rather than soothe and appeal, we're quick to revoke that opinion. Last December, an indie horror game called Horses was banned from two of the biggest platforms in gaming. Not because it was illegal in any way, but because of what it implied. And the strangest part, film has been doing this for almost a century. Horses is a horror game by Italian indie studio Santa Ragione and written by filmmaker Andrea Luco Bolera. It was supposed to launch on all major PC platforms. But 3 years before release, in 2023, Valve rejected the game outright, claiming they would not host a game that had sexual content involving a minor, something that even this early build of the game didn't have. By 2025, the game was set to launch on Epic Games, GOG, itch.io and other smaller platforms, but one day before launch, Epic Games pulled out too. They provided more reasoning than Valve had. The game had been re-reviewed and, despite its previous mature rating, had now been labelled adults only. For an indie game, this rating can be a death sentence. Most platforms ban all adults only games entirely. So, even if a game is legal, it can still be locked from the mainstream due to this rating. Without Steam or Epic, Horses lost access to the largest audience in PC gaming. Steam has the largest user base of any gaming platform, usually having more than 30 million users online at any one time. Epic also has a huge user base, averaging more than 78 million active users per month last year. These platforms don't just act like stores, but as gatekeepers. They decide what makes it into the mainstream, what gets seen, what gets sold, and in the case of some of these indie games, what gets to exist. So, what actually made Horses so controversial? A very early build of the game contained an incomplete scene in which a girl and her father visit the farm. The girl would decide which horse she wanted to ride, and an interactive dialogue scene would follow between the player and the girl, as she rode on the shoulders of a female horse. This was not intended to be a sexual scene, and it was cut very early on, the girl replaced with an older woman, but the devs believed that this juxtaposition might have been what got the game banned from Steam initially and began the controversy. But now, while the game contains disturbing imagery, sexual themes, and surreal sequences, much of it is stylized or partially obscured. It's never outwardly photorealistic, nor explicit in the way many people assume, and more importantly, it's inspired by iconic surrealist cinema. Directors like Luis Buñuel and Jan Schwankmajer built their careers on imagery designed to shock, confuse, and unsettle. But in that context, discomfort is the point, and it isn't considered a failure. It's worth mentioning, though, that upon their release, films aren't immune to these similar kinds of controversies. When A Clockwork Orange was released in 1971, it caused outrage. People accused it of glorifying violence and pushing things too far. It was controversial to a point that it was effectively pulled from distribution in the UK up until Stanley Kubrick's death in 1999. But today, this film is studied, it's written about, and it's considered an important film of its time. Twin Peaks: Fire Walk With Me had a similar story. When it first released, it was rejected. It was criticised for how far it went in its portrayal of abuse and psychological breakdown. It failed at the box office. However, over time, people came back to it, re-evaluated it, and now it's widely seen as one of David Lynch's most important works. Even then, more extreme examples exist. Irreversible by Gaspar Noé sparked massive backlash for its explicit depiction of sexual violence. People walked out of screenings and critics called it exploitative, but it was never fully dismissed. It was debated, it was analysed, and it was taken seriously, even though people hated it. That is where the key difference lies. Film will not reject these works outright, it will argue about them, and it will give them space to exist, but more importantly, space to be understood. Surrealist cinema has always relied on this. Luis Buñuel built his entire career on imagery designed to shock, not for the sake of the shock itself, but to force the audience into confrontation, to make them sit with something uncomfortable and something they'd rather look away from. And in a way, that's exactly what Horses is doing. It's not trying to be safe or widely appealing, it's trying to disturb you, and somehow that's where the line has been drawn. So why does this happen? Why is film allowed to push these boundaries, but games aren't? Part of it comes down to one key difference: interactivity. When you watch a film, you're an observer. No matter how disturbing it gets, there's always distance. You're watching something happen to someone else at somebody else's hand. But in a game, you're not just watching, you're there. You're moving through it, participating in it, sometimes even responsible for progressing it. And that changes things. It makes discomfort feel more personal and more immediate. It's harder to separate yourself from. But here's the problem with that argument. If games can make you feel more, if they can immerse you more deeply in something uncomfortable, shouldn't that make them more powerful as an artistic medium, not less? Because that's what art does. It challenges you, it unsettles you, and it forces you to confront things you might not want to. And yet, when games do exactly that, they're not treated as art at all. The idea of games as art has always been popular. It's something players, critics, and developers like to support, but in practice it comes with conditions. Games are art when they're beautiful and emotional, but when they become disturbing or explicit or morally uncomfortable, the label starts to disappear. And it isn't just about audiences, it's also about the platforms. Companies like Valve Corporation and Epic Games, they don't just sell these games, they control the access to them. In film, a controversial work can still exist on the fringes, with festivals of independent cinemas, online niche distribution. But in games, if you're removed from these major storefronts, you can be pushed out the mainstream entirely. So when a game like Horses crosses an invisible line, it's not criticism, it's exclusion. Not because it's illegal, and not because it shouldn't exist, but because it makes people uncomfortable in a way that the medium just isn't quite ready to accept. Maybe the real issue here isn't whether Horses goes too far. It's that we don't actually have a clear idea of how far games are allowed to go. Because right now, that line isn't defined by developers, it's not defined by critics, and it's not even defined by the audience. It's defined by the platforms, quietly, inconsistency, and to many studios without explanation. And it's created a very strange environment where games can aim to be artistic, they can aim to be experimental or even confrontational, but only within these boundaries. In something like film, those boundaries have been tested over decades. They've been pushed, broken, and redefined, and over time that's allowed the medium to grow. But in games, those limits still feel fixed, not because they have to be, but because they're enforced before they can be challenged. And that does have a knock-on effect, because if developers know that certain themes might get their work removed entirely, then those themes will just never be explored. Not because they aren't worth exploring, but because the risk is too high. And that's where something is lost. Not just individual games, but the possibility of what a game could be. Because every medium defines itself by what it allows, not by what's popular or successful, but what it's willing to tolerate. And right now, the edges in games are narrower than we would ever want to admit. So maybe Horses isn't an outlier. Maybe it's an example of something we're going to see more of, games that try to push further and that run into limits that aren't visible until it's a little bit too late. And if that's the case, the question has never been whether games are art. It's just the kind of art they're allowed to be.